Standing in my childhood bedroom with a trash bag full of clothes, I never imagined those words would be the last my mother spoke to me for 15 years. "You are a worthless mistake, Seraphina. Get out of my house and never come back." The slam of the front door behind me echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. But what hurt more was the silence from my two younger brothers watching from the window. I had just turned 18, graduated valedictorian, and earned a full scholarship to Stanford. Yet somehow, I was the family disappointment. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you are ready for a wild ride full of shocking twists and sweet revenge smash, that like button and hit subscribe, because this family drama will blow your mind. Trust me, you will not see this ending coming, and you definitely do not want to miss how karma finally catches up to the people who deserve it most. My name is Seraphina Blackwood, and my story begins in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, where appearances meant everything, and family secrets festered behind perfectly manicured lawns. Growing up, I always felt like an outsider in my own home. While my younger brothers Marcus and Dylan could do no wrong in our mother's eyes, every achievement I earned was met with cold indifference or outright hostility. My mother, Victoria Blackwood, was a prominent real estate attorney who built her reputation on being ruthless in business and maintaining the perfect family image. My father had died in a car accident when I was 5, leaving behind a substantial life insurance policy and investment portfolio that should have secured our future. Victoria remarried within 2 years to Robert Sterling, a charming investment banker who seemed to adore my brothers but barely acknowledged my existence. The favoritism was not subtle. Marcus and Dylan received brand new cars on their 16th birthdays, while I worked 3 part-time jobs to save for a used Honda. They attended expensive summer camps and private tutoring sessions, while I studied alone in my room, determined to prove my worth through academic excellence. When I graduated as valedictorian with a perfect SAT score and multiple scholarship offers, Victoria's response was a dismissive shrug. "Book smart does not make up for being socially awkward," she said, turning her attention back to Dylan's mediocre report card that she praised as if he had cured cancer. The night of my 18th birthday, everything came to a head. I had received my acceptance letter to Stanford with a full academic scholarship, something that should have made any parent proud. Instead of celebration, I walked into what felt like an intervention. Victoria, Robert, and both my brothers sat in the formal living room, their faces serious and cold. "Seraphina, we need to talk." Victoria began, her voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment. "You are 18 now, which means you are an adult. It is time you learn to stand on your own feet instead of expecting us to carry you." I stared at her in confusion. "Carry me? I have been working since I was 14 and paid for everything myself. I even got a full scholarship." "Your attitude is exactly the problem," Robert interrupted, his voice sharp. "You act like you are better than this family, like our support means nothing. You are ungrateful and entitled." Marcus, now 16 and clearly enjoying the show, smirked from his position on the expensive leather sofa that I had never been allowed to sit on with dirty clothes. "Mom, just tell her already. We all know she does not belong here anyway." The words that followed would haunt me for years. Victoria stood up, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier, and delivered the blow that shattered my world. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave this house. You are no longer welcome here. You are a constant reminder of everything wrong with my life, a worthless mistake I never should have had to endure." The room spun around me as the reality sank in. This was not about me being 18 or needing to be independent. This was about something deeper, something that had been building for years. The hatred in my mother's eyes was not new, but seeing it so openly displayed in front of my brothers made my stomach turn. But where am I supposed to go? I whispered, my voice barely audible. That is not my problem anymore, Victoria replied, already turning away from me. You are so smart, figure it out yourself. And do not even think about coming back here crying when reality hits. This door is closed to you forever. I spent that hour packing my meager belongings while listening to my family laugh and joke in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. No one came to check on me. No one offered to help. When I dragged my trash bags to the front door, Dylan was eating ice cream and watching television while Marcus played video games. They barely looked up as I struggled with my belongings. Standing on the porch with nowhere to go, I made a promise to myself that would drive everything I did for the next 15 years. I would not just survive, I would thrive. And someday, somehow I would uncover the truth about why my own mother could throw away her daughter so callously. Something was wrong with this picture, and I was determined to find out what. That night, I slept in my car in a 24-hour diner parking lot using my savings to buy coffee and stay warm. As I watched the sun rise through my windshield, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but underneath it was a burning determination that would fuel me through everything that came next. I had no idea that my mother's betrayal was just the tip of an iceberg that would eventually sink her entire carefully constructed world. Stanford University became my sanctuary and launching pad simultaneously, while other freshmen struggled with homesickness. I threw myself into my studies and networking with the intensity of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. My business economics major, combined with a minor in computer science, opened doors I never knew existed, and I discovered I had an intuitive understanding of financial markets that impressed even my professors. During my sophomore year, I met Professor James Morrison, a former Wall Street executive who saw potential in me that I was still learning to recognize in myself. When he offered me an internship at his consulting firm, I grabbed the opportunity with both hands. Working 20-hour days while maintaining my 4.0 GPA, I learned the intricacies of corporate finance investment strategies, and most importantly, how to trace money trails that others wanted to keep hidden. Seraphina, you have a gift, Professor Morrison told me during one late-night session as we analyzed a particularly complex merger deal. You see patterns where others see chaos. That is worth more than any degree I could give you. By my junior year, I had started my own small investment consulting business, helping startup companies navigate funding rounds and growth strategies. My reputation grew quickly in Silicon Valley circles, and by graduation, I had already established Blackwood Financial Solutions as a legitimate player in the venture capital world. The irony of using my family name for success was not lost on me, but I wanted them to see it someday and know exactly who had built this empire from nothing. 5 years after leaving home, I was managing a portfolio worth over $50 million and had offices in San Francisco, New York, and London. My team of analysts and researchers was small but incredibly talented, and we specialized in uncovering financial irregularities and hidden assets for high-net-worth clients going through divorces or business disputes. It was during this period that I developed the skills that would eventually bring my family's secrets to light. The breakthrough came during my 8th year in business when a client hired me to investigate her husband's hidden assets during their divorce proceedings. What should have been a straightforward case led me down a rabbit hole of shell companies' offshore accounts and fraudulent investment schemes. that ultimately exposed a massive Ponzi scheme involving several prominent Connecticut families. The investigation required me to dig deep into Connecticut public records, corporate filings, and real estate transactions dating back decades. That was when I saw my stepfather Robert Sterling's signature on documents that made my blood run cold. He was listed as the beneficiary of a life insurance policy taken out on my father just 6 months before the car accident that killed him. But more disturbing was the date discrepancy I noticed in the police reports versus the insurance claims. According to the insurance filing, my father had died 3 hours earlier than the police report indicated, and in a completely different location. My hands shook as I cross-referenced more documents, diving deeper into public records I had never thought to examine before. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Robert Sterling had not just married my grieving mother, he had systematically planned to acquire my father's assets and eliminate any obstacles to his inheritance. And the biggest obstacle had been me, the biological daughter who would have had legal claims to my father's estate when I turned 18. The accident report mentioned a witness who had never been contacted by police despite being listed in the initial incident log. Traffic camera footage from that night had mysteriously disappeared from police files, but I found backup copies in the City Transportation Department archives that showed a different story entirely. My father's car had not skidded off the road due to weather conditions. It had been forced off by another vehicle that fled the scene. But the most damning evidence came from financial records, showing that Robert had been having an affair with my mother for over a year before my father's death, and they had taken out multiple insurance policies and changed beneficiary information on my father's investment accounts without his knowledge. The signatures on several documents were clearly forged, something I could now recognize after years of analyzing financial fraud cases. As I compiled this evidence, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. My mother's sudden wealth after my father's death had not come from his life insurance alone. It had come from systematically liquidating his investment portfolio and transferring the funds to accounts that Robert controlled. They had stolen my inheritance, used it to build their lavish lifestyle, and then discarded me when I became old enough to potentially discover the truth. The rage I felt was unlike anything I had ever experienced, but underneath it was something colder and more calculating. I had spent 15 years building the skills and resources necessary to expose financial crimes, and now I was staring at the biggest case of my career. This was not just about getting justice for my father or reclaiming what was rightfully mine. This was about bringing down 2 people who had murdered for money and destroyed a child's life to cover their tracks. I spent the next 6 months quietly gathering additional evidence using every resource at my disposal to build an airtight case. My team of investigators, thinking they were working on a routine fraud case for a client, helped me trace financial records, interview former family associates, and even locate the missing witness from my father's accident scene. The picture that emerged was of a carefully planned murder, followed by years of financial manipulation and fraud. When I finally had everything I needed, I made a decision that would change not only my life, but the lives of everyone who had betrayed me. It was time to go home to Connecticut, not as the broken 18-year-old girl they had thrown away, but as a successful businesswoman with the power to destroy them completely. They had taught me that family meant nothing when money was involved, and I was about to give them a masterclass in exactly what that lesson looked like when applied by someone who actually understood how money and power worked. The confrontation I was planning would not be emotional or desperate. It would be surgical, calculated, and absolutely devastating. After 15 years of building my empire and uncovering their crimes, I was finally ready to collect on the debt they owed me. Returning to Connecticut felt surreal after 15 years of self-imposed exile. The wealthy suburb where I had grown up looked smaller somehow, its perfect facades hiding the same ugly secrets they always had. I checked into the Marriott downtown under my business name, wanting to observe before making my presence known. My first stop was the courthouse where I filed preliminary paperwork for what would become the most complex fraud and wrongful death investigation in the county's history. My private investigator, Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes, had already begun surveillance on my family's current activities. What he discovered added even more fuel to the fire burning inside me. Victoria and Robert were now running a successful real estate investment company that specialized in acquiring properties from elderly residents and distressed homeowners. Their methods walked the fine line between aggressive business practices and elder abuse, but they had been careful to stay just within legal boundaries. Marcus, my brother, was now 28 and working as a junior partner in their company, while Dylan, 26, had failed out of 3 different colleges and was living at home while working sporadically for their business. The family dynamic had apparently not changed much. The Golden Boys were still being protected and enabled, while contributing very little to the family's success. "Your mother has built quite an empire," Marcus Webb reported during our meeting at a discreet coffee shop across town. "But it is all built on the foundation of your father's money, and there are some questionable transactions that suggest they are still cutting corners. The elderly clients they target often sign documents they do not fully understand, and several families have filed complaints about aggressive sales tactics and misrepresented property values." This information gave me an idea for building the alliances I would need to take them down completely. If Victoria and Robert were victimizing elderly residents, there would be families who had been hurt by their practices and would be eager to see justice served. I needed to find these people and unite them in a common cause. My first ally came from an unexpected source. Margaret Chen, an elderly Asian American woman who had lost her family home to one of Victoria's acquisition schemes, reached out to me after hearing I was investigating Blackwood Sterling real estate. Her granddaughter Linda worked as a paralegal at a law firm that had tried unsuccessfully to help Margaret recover her property. They told my grandmother the property taxes were going up, and she could not afford to keep the house, Linda explained during our meeting at her law firm. They offered to buy it at below market value, but promised she could stay there as a renter. 6 months later, they evicted her and sold the property for 3 times what they paid. She lost everything, including family heirlooms that were stored in the house. Margaret's story was heartbreaking, but also valuable evidence of a pattern of elder abuse that could be prosecuted under both civil and criminal statutes. More importantly, Linda had legal training and access to resources that could help me build a stronger case. She became my second team member, working evenings and weekends to help document similar cases involving other elderly victims. Through Linda, I met David Rodriguez, a social worker who had been trying for years to get authorities to investigate predatory real estate practices targeting his elderly clients. David had documentation of at least 12 cases where elderly residents had been manipulated into selling their homes under false pretenses only to find themselves homeless or living in substandard conditions afterward. "I have been banging my head against the wall, trying to get someone to take this seriously," David told me during our first meeting. "These people are destroying lives for profit, but they have connections in the legal system that protect them. When I tried to file complaints, they mysteriously disappeared or were dismissed without investigation." David's revelation about corruption in the local legal system was concerning, but not entirely surprising. Victoria had been a prominent attorney for decades and had undoubtedly built relationships with judges, prosecutors, and police officials who might be reluctant to pursue charges against her. This meant I needed to be even more careful about how I proceeded and build a case so solid that no amount of political influence could dismiss it. My most valuable ally came through professional connections I had developed over the years. Sandra Kim, an investigative journalist for the Hartford Courant, had been following stories about elder abuse and financial crimes for several years. When I reached out to her through my business channels, she was immediately interested in the scope of the fraud I was uncovering. This could be the biggest financial crime story in Connecticut history, Sandra said after reviewing some of the evidence I had compiled. A murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and decades of money laundering. This has everything. But we need to be absolutely certain about our facts, because they will come after us with everything they have. Sandra brought investigative resources and media connections that I could never have accessed on my own. More importantly, she understood how to build a narrative that would capture public attention and make it impossible for the authorities to ignore our evidence. She began working on a series of articles that would expose the pattern of elder abuse while building toward the bigger revelation about my father's murder and the insurance fraud that funded Victoria's empire. As our alliance grew stronger, we developed a strategy that would strike at multiple targets simultaneously. Linda would file complaints with state regulatory agencies about the real estate fraud and elder abuse. David would coordinate with his clients to file a class action lawsuit seeking damages and recovery of stolen property. Sandra would publish a series of investigative articles that would bring public scrutiny to their business practices, and I would present evidence of my father's murder to both state and federal authorities, since the insurance fraud crossed state lines and involved federal banking regulations. But the most crucial part of our strategy involved turning their own family dynamics against them. Through surveillance and financial analysis, we had learned that Marcus and Dylan were both deeply in debt despite their family's apparent wealth. Marcus had a gambling problem that had cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars, while Dylan's drug addiction had led to expensive rehabilitation programs and legal fees from multiple arrests. Both brothers were vulnerable to pressure, and both had access to internal family documents and business records that could provide crucial evidence of their parents' crimes. The question was whether either of them could be convinced to turn against Victoria and Robert in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Family loyalty only goes so far when prison time is involved, Marcus Webb observed during one of our strategy sessions. If we can show them that they are going down with their parents, unless they cooperate, at least one of them might be willing to make a deal. The thought of approaching my brothers after 15 years of silence was emotionally challenging, but I had learned to compartmentalize my feelings when business was involved. These were not the little boys I had grown up with. They were grown men who had participated in covering up crimes and victimizing innocent people. If they chose to protect criminals over doing the right thing, they would face the consequences along with their parents. As autumn arrived in Connecticut, our alliance was ready to begin the coordinated attack that would bring down the Blackwood Sterling empire. We had evidence, media support, legal representation, and regulatory backing. Most importantly, we had identified the weaknesses in their operation that would make their defense impossible to sustain. The next phase would test everything I had learned about strategy, patience, and the power of information. Victoria had taught me that family meant nothing when money was involved, but she was about to learn that this lesson worked both ways. The daughter she had thrown away was coming home, and she was bringing everything necessary to destroy the lives they had built on my father's grave. The coordinated attack began on a cold November morning, when Sandra's first article hit the front page of the Hartford Courant. Local real estate empire built on elder abuse detailed 12 specific cases of elderly residents who had lost their homes to predatory practices, complete with interviews and documentation that painted Blackwood Sterling Real Estate as a criminal organization disguising itself as a legitimate business. The response was immediate and explosive. By noon, the state attorney general's office had announced they were opening an investigation into elder abuse allegations. By evening, 3 television news stations had picked up the story, and social media was buzzing with families sharing their own experiences with Victoria and Robert's company. I watched the coverage from my hotel room, feeling a satisfaction I had been waiting 15 years to experience. But the real test came 2 days later, when Linda received a phone call that would change everything. "Seraphina, we have a problem." Linda's voice was shaky when she called me at 7 in the morning. "My boss just told me I am being reassigned to a different department effective immediately. They said there were concerns about my objectivity on cases involving Blackwood Sterling, and I am no longer allowed to work on anything related to their business." The news hit me like a physical blow. Linda's law firm was one of the most respected in the state, and their sudden reversal could only mean one thing. Victoria had activated her network of legal and political connections to neutralize our alliance. My suspicions were confirmed an hour later when David Rodriguez called with similar news. His supervisor had informed him that several families he had been working with were withdrawing their complaints against Blackwood Sterling, citing concerns about the publicity affecting their privacy. When David pressed for details, he was told that his continued involvement in the investigation was affecting his job performance, and he needed to focus on his assigned caseload. But the most devastating blow came that afternoon when Marcus Webb delivered news that made my blood run cold. "Someone got to Sandra Kim," he said, his voice grim. Her editor killed the follow-up articles and reassigned her to cover local school board meetings. When I tried to contact her directly, she said she could not discuss the Blackwood Sterling investigation anymore. I stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean she cannot discuss it? We have contracts, agreements." "Seraphina, they got to her. I do not know how, but someone with serious power made some serious threats. Sandra looked genuinely scared when I saw her yesterday. She kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to be watching her." The realization that Victoria had managed to neutralize 3 of my 4 key allies within 48 hours was both impressive and terrifying. I had underestimated her political connections and her willingness to use them ruthlessly to protect her empire. But what happened next showed me that my biggest mistake had been trusting the wrong person entirely. Marcus Webb had been my most trusted ally, the former FBI agent with the sterling reputation and the impressive track record of solving financial crimes. He was the one person I had shared all my evidence with, the one who had access to every document and every strategy we had developed. So when he called me for an emergency meeting at a restaurant across town, I went without hesitation. "We need to talk about your options," he said. As soon as I sat down, his demeanor completely different from every previous interaction we had had. "Your mother and stepfather are more connected than we realized, and this investigation is going to destroy innocent people if it continues." I felt the world shift around me as his words sank in. "What are you talking about? What innocent people?" "Your brothers, for starters. Marcus has a gambling problem." "Yes, but Dylan is genuinely trying to get clean and build a legitimate life. If this investigation moves forward, they are going to be charged as accessories to crimes they had nothing to do with." "They were children when your father died, Seraphina. They do not deserve to have their lives destroyed because of decisions their parents made. The concern in his voice seemed genuine, but something about his sudden change in perspective felt wrong. Marcus, we talked about this. We agreed that anyone who participated in covering up crimes would face consequences. That was always part of the plan. Plans change when you realize the collateral damage, he replied, leaning forward with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. But there is a way to protect them and still get what you want. Your mother is willing to make a deal. My heart stopped. A deal? You talked to my mother. She reached out through intermediaries after the article came out. She knows the evidence you have is damaging, and she is willing to make financial restitution for your father's estate and provide a formal apology. She will even shut down the real estate business and retire from practicing law. But in exchange, you drop the criminal investigation and agree to keep this out of the courts. I stood up so quickly that my chair fell backward, causing other diners to turn and stare. Are you insane? She murdered my father and stole my inheritance, then threw me out like garbage when I turned 18. And you think I should accept an apology and some money? Seraphina, be reasonable. How much? I interrupted, my voice deadly quiet. How much did she pay you to betray me? The brief flash of guilt in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Marcus Webb, the man I had trusted with the most important case of my life, had been bought. Not only had he shared our entire strategy with Victoria, but he had also been actively working to sabotage our investigation from the inside. It is not what you think, he said, but I was already walking away. Seraphina, wait. You are making a mistake. I did not turn around. Instead, I walked straight to my car and drove back to my hotel, my mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. Victoria had not just neutralized my allies. She had turned my most trusted confidant against me and gained access to everything I had worked months to compile. That night, alone in my hotel room, I experienced the darkest moment since the night I had been thrown out of my family home. Everything I had worked for seemed to be crumbling around me, and the people I had trusted had either been scared away or bought off. Victoria had played the game better than I had, using her decades of experience in manipulation and corruption to outmaneuver me at every turn. But as I sat in that hotel room staring at copies of documents that Marcus Webb did not know I had kept separate from our shared files, I realized something important. The betrayal that felt like my greatest defeat might actually be the key to my ultimate victory. Victoria had shown her hand by reaching out to Marcus, which meant she was scared enough to take desperate measures. And desperate people make mistakes. Moreover, her willingness to offer a deal meant she did not have the political protection she wanted me to believe she had. If she could make this investigation disappear through her connections, she would have done so already, instead of trying to negotiate. She was vulnerable, and now I knew it. The game was not over. It was just entering its most dangerous phase. And this time, I would be playing it completely alone, which meant Victoria would have no way to predict my next move or buy off my allies. The daughter she had thrown away was about to show her exactly what 15 years of building an empire from nothing had taught me about survival strategy and revenge. The revelation about Marcus Webb's betrayal forced me to completely rethink my approach, but it also revealed something crucial. Victoria was running scared. Her desperate attempt to buy off my investigator meant the evidence I had compiled was more damaging than she could handle through her usual political channels. More importantly, her offer of a deal suggested she did not have complete control over the situation, which meant there were vulnerabilities I had not yet exploited. I spent 3 days alone in my hotel room, analyzing every piece of evidence I had kept in my personal files, separate from anything Marcus Webb had access to. The financial records showing the insurance fraud, the traffic camera footage proving my father's murder was not an accident. The forged signatures on estate documents, all of this was still secure and unknown to Victoria's team. But I needed help to move forward. And this time, I had to be absolutely certain about who I could trust. The answer came from an unexpected source when I received a phone call from Detective Sarah Martinez with the Connecticut State Police Financial Crimes Unit. "Miss Blackwood, I understand you have been investigating some serious allegations involving your family members," Detective Martinez said when she called me on a Thursday morning. "I would like to meet with you to discuss what you have discovered." My first instinct was suspicion after Marcus Webb's betrayal. I questioned whether anyone in law enforcement could be trusted, but something in Detective Martinez's voice suggested this was different. When we met at a coffee shop in Hartford, I understood why. "I have been investigating financial crimes in Connecticut for 12 years," she explained, her dark eyes serious and focused. "Your stepfather, Robert Sterling, has been on my radar for almost that entire time, but every case I have tried to build against him has mysteriously fallen apart. Witnesses change their stories, evidence disappears, and my supervisors suddenly develop concerns about resource allocation." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "But 3 months ago, I was contacted by someone from the FBI's white-collar crime division. They have been building a federal case involving insurance fraud and money laundering that crosses multiple state lines, and Robert Sterling's name keeps appearing in their investigation. Your mother's business practices have also attracted attention from federal banking regulators because of the volume of cash transactions they process." This was the breakthrough I had been hoping for. Federal investigators would be much harder for Victoria to intimidate or buy off, and they would have resources far beyond anything a local investigation could provide. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything you have," Detective Martinez replied. "But more than that, I need you to understand that what we are building here is bigger than personal revenge. We think your stepfather is part of a network that has been defrauding insurance companies and elderly victims across the entire Northeast region. Your mother's real estate business may be a front for laundering money from multiple criminal enterprises." She pulled out a thick folder and opened it on the table between us. "These are bank records we obtained through federal subpoenas. Look at the pattern of deposits into your mother's business accounts over the past 5 years. The numbers made my head spin. Blackwood Sterling Real Estate had processed over $50 million in transactions, but the source of much of that money was unclear. Large cash deposits appeared regularly with vague notations like consulting fees and private investor payments that did not correspond to any documented real estate transactions. "We think they are washing money for other criminal organizations," Detective Martinez continued. "The elderly victims they target are not just losing their homes, they are being used as unwitting participants in a money laundering scheme. When they sign documents, they do not understand they are often agreeing to let their properties be used as collateral for loans they never receive." The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering, but it also explained why Victoria had been so confident in her ability to make my investigation disappear. She was not just protecting herself and Robert. She was protecting an entire network of criminals who had significant motivation to keep their operations secret. "There is something else you need to know," Detective Martinez said, her expression growing even more serious. "We have been monitoring communications between your stepfather and several known organized crime figures. The level of violence associated with these people is significant, which means you may be in physical danger if they perceive you as a threat to their operation." A chill ran down my spine as the implications sank in. This was no longer just about exposing fraud and getting justice for my father. This was about taking down a criminal network that would kill to protect itself. But Detective Martinez was not finished. "However, we also have an opportunity that did not exist before. One of your brothers has reached out to us expressing willingness to cooperate with our investigation." I stared at her in shock. "Which brother?" "Dylan. He contacted us 2 days ago through his attorney, claiming he has information about his parents' business that he wants to share in exchange for immunity from prosecution. He says he has been documenting their activities for months because he suspected they were involved in something illegal, and he wants out before it destroys his life." The irony was overwhelming. Dylan, the youngest brother who had always been the most protected and enabled, was now the one willing to turn against Victoria and Robert. But I remained skeptical about his motivations. Why should we trust him? He has had years to come forward if he really objected to what they were doing. Detective Martinez nodded. "That is exactly what I said. But his attorney provided some preliminary information that checks out with what we already know, and Dylan claims he has access to documents and recordings that could provide crucial evidence. More importantly, he is terrified. His drug problems were not just recreational. He owes money to some very dangerous people, and he thinks his parents have been using him as collateral for loans they have no intention of repaying." This revelation added another layer to the family dynamics I thought I understood. Victoria and Robert had not just been protecting Dylan, they had been exploiting his vulnerabilities to facilitate their criminal activities. "There is a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning where Dylan will provide an initial proffer of what he knows." Detective Martinez continued. "I would like you to be there both as a potential victim with standing in this case and as someone who can verify the accuracy of information about your family's history." The thought of seeing Dylan again after 15 years was emotionally complicated, but I knew this might be my only chance to get the evidence needed to bring Victoria and Robert to justice. More importantly, if Dylan was genuinely trying to escape the criminal enterprise his parents had built, he might be the ally I needed to access the insider information that could make our case unbreakable. "I will be there," I said. "But I want to make one thing clear. If this is some kind of setup or trap, if Dylan is working with Victoria to try to manipulate me again, I will make sure he goes down with the rest of them." Detective Martinez smiled grimly. "I would expect nothing less. But Seraphina, I want you to prepare yourself for what you might learn tomorrow. Based on the preliminary information Dylan has provided, the crimes committed against you and your father were even worse than we initially suspected. And the network of corruption involves people in positions of authority that you trusted to protect you." As I drove back to my hotel that night, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread about what the next day would bring. After 15 years of wondering why my own mother had thrown me away so callously, I was finally going to learn the complete truth. But I also understood that this truth might be more devastating than anything I had imagined, and that the people responsible for destroying my childhood were more dangerous than I had realized. The final confrontation was approaching, and this time I would be going into it with federal backing, solid evidence, and possibly an inside source who could provide the missing pieces of a puzzle that had haunted me for half my life. Victoria had taught me that family meant nothing when money was involved. But tomorrow she would learn what happened when someone who understood that lesson better than she did decided to apply it against her. The federal building in Hartford felt like a fortress as I walked through security to meet with Dylan for the first time in 15 years. Detective Martinez had arranged for the meeting to take place in a secure conference room with federal agents present to ensure everyone's safety and to document anything that might be used as evidence. When Dylan walked into the room, I barely recognized the man he had become. The spoiled teenager I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked decades older than his 26 years, with hollow eyes and the nervous mannerisms of someone who had seen too much and feared for his life. "Seraphina," he said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. "I know you have no reason to trust me, and I do not expect you to forgive me for what our family did to you. But I need you to know that I have been trying to find a way to make this right for a long time." His attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, placed a thick folder on the table. "My client has been documenting his parents' criminal activities for the past 8 months, ever since he discovered they had been using his drug debts as leverage in their money laundering operation. What he has uncovered goes far beyond insurance fraud and elder abuse." Dylan opened the folder and pulled out photographs, financial documents, and what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations. "Mom and Robert have been running a criminal enterprise for over 15 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They did not just kill our father for his insurance money. They have been killing people regularly as part of their business model." The room fell completely silent as the magnitude of his accusations sank in. Detective Martinez leaned forward, her expression intense. "You are alleging that they have committed multiple murders." "At least 7 that I know of for certain," Dylan replied, pulling out a handwritten list with names and dates. Elderly clients who started asking too many questions about their property transfers. A private investigator who was getting too close to discovering the insurance fraud. A federal banking examiner who noticed irregularities in their cash transactions. He looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. "And our father was not the first spouse Robert eliminated to access someone's assets. His previous wife died in what was ruled a suicide, but I found emails between him and Mom discussing how they staged it." The federal agent taking notes looked up from his pad. "Do you have evidence to support these allegations?" Dylan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. "I have been wearing a wire for 8 months, recording every conversation I could. Mom and Robert think I am too high to pay attention to their business discussions, so they talk openly in front of me. Last week, they were planning to eliminate someone they referred to as the California problem, who had been asking questions about Dad's death." My blood ran cold as I realized he was talking about me. "They were planning to kill me. Tomorrow night, actually," Dylan said, his hands shaking as he spoke. "They hired someone to make it look like a robbery gone wrong at your hotel. Robert said it would be easier to deal with your investigation if you were not alive to pursue it." The room erupted in activity as federal agents began making phone calls to coordinate my protection and to move forward with arrests. But Dylan was not finished with his revelations. "There is something else you need to know about why Mom threw you out when you turned 18, he said, his voice breaking. "It was not just about the money, although that was part of it. She was afraid of you." I stared at him in confusion. "Afraid of me? I was 18 years old and had nothing. She was afraid of how smart you were, and she was afraid you would figure out what really happened to Dad. You were asking questions even as a teenager, noticing inconsistencies in their stories about the accident. Robert wanted to eliminate you then, but Mom thought throwing you out would be enough to neutralize the threat." He pulled out a letter that I recognized as my own handwriting. You wrote to Marcus 3 years after you left, asking him to help you get copies of Dad's death certificate and police reports because you were starting to suspect something was wrong. Marcus showed the letter to Mom, and that is when they realized you were not going to let this go. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Even my younger brother Marcus had been working against me, sharing information about my investigation with the people who had murdered our father. Marcus knew, I whispered. Marcus has known everything since he was 21. Mom and Robert brought him into the business completely, including the money laundering and the violence. He helped plan at least 3 of the murders I know about, and he was the one who recruited Marcus Webb to infiltrate your investigation team. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Not only had my mother and stepfather murdered my father and stolen my inheritance, but they had turned my brother into an accomplice and used him to sabotage every attempt I made to uncover the truth. Detective Martinez leaned across the table. Dylan, are you willing to testify to everything you have told us here today, knowing that it will likely result in life sentences for your mother, stepfather, and brother? Dylan nodded, tears streaming down his face. They destroyed our family, and they have been destroying other families for years. I cannot live with being part of this anymore, and I cannot let them kill Seraphina like they killed our father. The arrests happened simultaneously across 3 locations the next morning. Federal agents took Victoria and Robert into custody at their home, while state police arrested Marcus at his office. The charges included murder insurance fraud, money laundering, elder abuse conspiracy, and racketeering under federal RICO statutes. The evidence Dylan provided, combined with federal surveillance and the financial records I had compiled, created an overwhelming case that no amount of political influence could dismiss. The recordings he had made included explicit discussions of past murders and detailed plans for future crimes, including my assassination. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, when I sat in a federal courtroom and watched Victoria's face as the prosecutor read the complete list of charges against her. The woman who had thrown me out of her house for being a worthless mistake was now facing multiple life sentences for crimes that spanned over 2 decades. When she finally looked in my direction, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before: fear. Not just fear of the consequences she was facing, but fear of me, the daughter she had discarded, who had grown up to become someone powerful enough to destroy her completely. The plea negotiations lasted 6 months, but ultimately all 3 defendants accepted life sentences without the possibility of parole in exchange for providing information about the broader criminal network they had been part of. Over 40 additional arrests were made based on their cooperation, dismantling a money laundering operation that had processed over $200 million in illegal proceeds. Dylan entered witness protection after his testimony, but not before we had several long conversations about our childhood and the family we had both lost to greed and violence. He would never be able to fully atone for his years of silence, but his courage in finally coming forward had saved my life and brought justice for our father. The civil settlements took another year to resolve, but ultimately I recovered not only my father's original estate, but also damages for the years of fraud and the pain and suffering caused by the crimes committed against our family. The money was substantial, over $20 million, but it could never replace the childhood that was stolen from me or bring back the father I had lost. More importantly, I used the experience to redirect my business toward helping other families uncover financial crimes and elder abuse. Blackwood Financial Solutions became Blackwood Family Justice, a nonprofit organization that provides investigation services and legal support to families who suspect they are victims of inheritance fraud or financial manipulation. Margaret Chen. The elderly woman whose home had been stolen by Victoria's company became one of our first clients in recovering her property and obtaining damages. Linda, the paralegal who had initially helped me, joined our organization as a staff attorney after her former law firm was investigated for its connections to the criminal enterprise. David Rodriguez continued his work protecting elderly residents, but now he had the backing of a well-funded organization that could provide the resources necessary to take on sophisticated financial criminals. Even Sandra Kim, the journalist who had been scared away from the story, eventually returned to investigate the broader implications of the case. Her series on corruption in Connecticut's legal and political systems won a Pulitzer Prize and led to additional reforms designed to prevent the kind of institutional protection that had allowed Victoria's crimes to continue for so long. As I sit in my office today, looking at photos of the families we have helped and the criminals we have brought to justice, I realize that being thrown out of my mother's house at 18 was not the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was the beginning of becoming the person I was meant to be. The woman who told me I was a worthless mistake taught me something valuable even if she did not intend to. She taught me that when family betrays you, when institutions fail you, when the entire world seems aligned against you, the only person you can truly depend on is yourself. But she also taught me through her own example that power without conscience becomes corruption, and that the people who seem untouchable are often the most vulnerable to their own weaknesses. Victoria is now serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security federal prison, where she will spend the rest of her life thinking about the daughter she threw away, who grew up to destroy everything she had built on blood and lies. Robert and Marcus received similar sentences, and the criminal network they were part of has been completely dismantled. But perhaps the most important lesson I learned is that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming so successful that your enemies destroy themselves trying to bring you down. The chosen family I have built through my work, the colleagues who share my mission, the clients whose trust I have earned, the survivors who have found their voices through our advocacy, is worth more than any biological relationship based on shared DNA, but corrupted by greed and violence. Today, 15 years after being told I was worthless, I run an organization that has recovered over $100 million in stolen assets for families across the country, and I sleep peacefully, knowing that the people who murdered my father are spending their lives in prison cells thinking every day about the mistake they made when they underestimated the worthless daughter they threw away. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone who was supposed to protect you? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how we deal with toxic family relationships and whether blood really makes people family, or if family is something we choose through our actions and values. If this story resonated with you and you believe in the importance of holding powerful people accountable for their crimes, please hit that like button to help this message reach more people who might need to hear it. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about justice, family drama, and finding strength in the darkest moments of our lives. And please share this video with anyone who might be struggling with family betrayal or wondering whether they have the strength to stand up to people who seem untouchable. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember that no matter how powerless you might feel right now, sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up giving us exactly the motivation we need to become unstoppable. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. It is determined by how you choose to respond when life tests your strength and character. Stay strong. Seek justice and never let anyone convince you that you are not worthy of love, respect, and the truth. Until next time, this is Seraphina reminding you that the best revenge is a life well lived, and the courage to speak truth to power no matter the cost.